Alright, so tonight we're going to cover Parashat Shelach Lecha. That is the parasha that discusses at the very beginning the mission of the spies. There were two sets of spies that went to explore Israel. The spies that Moshe Rabbeinu sent, even though it was not necessary, they wanted to see. They wanted to see what Israel is all about. And the second set of spies, the one Yeshua sent, was right before they were entering the land of Israel. They were only two spies as opposed to the 12 that were sent by Moshe. And these two were just to check out from where to enter, how to enter, what the mood is in the land and so forth. So those two spies that were sent by Yeshua were actually on a very normal type of mission, of some strategic importance, you can say. This mission, however, was not necessarily something that was recommended by Hashem. God had promised that this is a land of Zabat Chalav Udvash, a land that flows of milk and honey. It is a good place. There's nothing for you to explore, to check it out, to be sure that this is really somewhere where you want to go. They should have relied on Hashem's promise. After all, Hashem has been guiding them all along. Nothing to fear whatsoever. So this whole mission of 12 spies being sent from the very start was not such a good idea. Even though the individuals that were sent on the mission were all leaders and great people, for those of you who have read the Torah, read this parasha, you know that they failed in their mission. They came back with a very, very negative report of what they saw, which caused tremendous discouragement amongst the people, amongst the nation. They began to fear what lies ahead. They made it sound, the spies, that this would be very difficult challenge, too difficult to conquer perhaps, that it was not worth it. So as a result of that, the Jewish nation was punished, that they would spend 40 years in the desert. That generation would not enter Israel, those between the age of 20 and 60. It was only their children, the next generation, that would merit to enter the land and conquer the land. So it's a very difficult topic to understand what exactly went wrong. It is especially difficult because we're dealing here with the Jewish nation. We're not talking about the Asafsuf anymore. We're not talking about the multitudes, the various other peoples that joined the Jewish nation, as they're called, the Erev Rav, who wanted to join the bandwagon and be liberated from Egyptian bondage. So they converted. They were never sincere. They caused us tremendous amount of troubles in the desert. So we're not even talking about them. We're talking about the leaders of the Jewish people. How could they make such a mistake? How could they bring back a negative report? And this requires a little bit of a deeper analysis because it's not so simple. When we read the Torah, many tend to just read the text superficially without investigating a little bit further. And that leads to a lot of misunderstanding. It's important to learn the Torah, not just to read it, to learn it with the commentaries. What exactly went on? What was the mindset of these people? What were they thinking? Because we are told that to some extent, politics got in the way. It was not just a mere observation of certain facts that led them to have second thoughts about the whole situation. No, it was somewhat politically motivated. Their reasoning was faulty. And as a result of that, they reached the wrong conclusions. So we need to understand a little bit what was wrong with what they said and why would they so punished so severely that not only did they die in a very ugly type of death, the spies, they died a very, very ugly death. The entire generation suffered, and it was on that day that they came back with a bad report that the Jewish nation, for many years after, suffers the consequences on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. That was the day that the Bet HaMikdash, the temple, was destroyed. The same day that they cried for nothing, for something they shouldn't have cried and shouldn't have complained, in the future there will be something that they will need to cry for. as Hashem says, that was something that you should not have cried for. Now you will have something that you will need to cry for many, many years to come. The destruction of the temple on the exact same day. So apparently this is something very serious. And on a simplistic level, it definitely has something to do with the ending of last week's Parasha, which speaks about Lashon Hara, about negative speech with Miriam, if you recall. This is negative speech, even though not necessarily about people, about the land. But this is not just any ordinary land. This is Eretz Yisrael. This is the land of Israel. This is the promised land. So there's obviously something wrong with their approach, even though they started off apparently innocently, wanting to just explore, to see what it's all about. Somehow they came back and they changed their mind. So what exactly did they do wrong here? Most of you have been, unfortunately, to a house of mourning. What are you supposed to do in a house of mourning? You're supposed to share in the pain of the mourners. Talk a little bit about the individual who passed away, the pleasant memories perhaps, depending on, of course, the age at which he died. If he was a young man or an older person, obviously it very much depends if it was a big tragedy or not. But it's a mitzvah. It is a big mitzvah. It's a good thing to do, is to be there for them, for the mourners who are going to be sitting Shiva, going to be sitting 7 days of mourning. And to share with them the pain means that you're not alone here. Your loss is our loss. It's a loss for the entire community. We try to somewhat make them feel better, be there for them. It could be a very, very painful time during someone's life when he lost someone who was very, very dear to him. So this is a sensitive time. Sensitive in what we say to them. Some people do not know what to say, and they say the wrong things. What did he die of? That's not a good thing to do. That's not a question that should be asked. Not to the people who are mourning. It's very sensitive to talk about the kind of death. If it was a tragic death, if it was a very serious illness, you don't ask these questions. Imagine someone coming not to visit those who are mourning, but visiting the sick. That's also mitzvah, bikur cholim, right? To visit those who are sick. And this individual who's being visited right now is very, very sick, with a serious illness. And the person who comes to visit him asks him, what do you have? And he tells him, I have this and this. Oh, I know someone just like you who had this and died at a very young age. You just broke his spirits. Instead of giving him hope and encouragement and making him feel good, look what you did, God forbid. So some people have no tact. Some people say the wrong things, and they do more damage than they help. If one does not know what to say, the best thing is keep quiet. You don't have to say anything. In a house of mourner, it is good enough if you're there, if you sit there. And the rabbis tell us, let him begin the talking. Let him begin to ask the questions. Oh, did you know him or her? What do you recall? What do you remember of him? Let him begin to ask questions. Not you. This is not a time to dig into exactly what happened. One has to be very, very sensitive. The same happened with the mission of the spies. The way they described what they saw, the way they reported what they observed, was very, very discouraging. Here the people are full of hope. They were just let out of Egypt, out of bondage. They don't want to die. They don't want to go through a difficult battle. As it is, they've had other challenges in the desert. They don't need more challenges. They're not prepared for this. Their mentality is a slave mentality. Even though they've received the Torah, and they definitely were in a very, very high spiritual level, but it was a very delicate time for them. They didn't need any negative report coming from the spies. So they should have been a lot more careful with what information they shared. But it's not just the information. You see, they didn't lie they pretty much reported what they saw. The problem is that they exaggerated the situation and they gave an opinion. Who asked you for your opinion? And that's a lot of times the problem of what reporters do. A great deal of news wants to tell us their opinion about the situation, where their job really is supposed to be, just tell us the news. Don't give us your opinion, what you think. Opinions in an opinion article. It's a separate page in the newspaper. When you're giving over information, just give it over, neutral, as is. Don't give your opinion. Their opinion, of course, was not based on reality. It was lacking of emunah, of faith and trust in God. They experienced after all the miracles. So how could they arrive at the wrong conclusion? How could they give such a negative opinion about what they saw? So as a result of the way they gave over their report, the people began to cry and complain and lose hope in the journey. And that is why this was a very, very serious incident which the Torah records. The Torah records those things that we need to learn from, not just every little incident that occurred during 40 years of the desert. If an incident is recorded, it is of great importance for us, something that we need to learn from. But if you follow the Parasha, you will see that Hashem is very upset at everyone, not only the spies, because Himma'asu, they despise the land. And to despise the land is not something too good. This is a land that was promised, that is a land that flows milk and honey. It's a good land. So to despise it, to not care about it, to just basically throw away the gift that you just received is very, very disrespectful. But that term is a little bit difficult to understand. Did they really despise it? What about if they were just afraid? Based on what they heard, maybe they were really afraid and didn't want to continue, to inherit the land that was promised to them. They had their fears. So where do we see that the real issue here is that they despised it, not that they were fearful? Because initially, when they hear the bad report, you could think that they really don't want to get involved into something that is so challenging and difficult. But they're being blamed that they despise the land. Where do we see that? The spies came back, and they definitely brought some good news. They didn't only bring back bad news. What was the good news? Look at the fruit. They actually brought it with them. So there was something to be amazed at. But instead of using that as an example for all the good that there is in the land, they use that in a negative way too. You see how the fruit are so big? Isn't that strange? Well, there's a lot more strange things there too besides the fruit. Here you have an opportunity to build on what you just brought as an example of how blessed the land is, and instead they use it in the wrong way. They pointed out the faults that they saw. Now, what's wrong with pointing out the faults? No one is perfect. No place is perfect. Every land, every country has its pluses and its minuses. So if you want to give over an accurate report, what's wrong with them sharing that information too? Should they have not? What was their point of bringing out the bad? There's a very interesting Gemara that when you go to a wedding, it's a big mitzvah, lesameach hatan dekala, right? To make the bride and groom happy. You dance, you come to their wedding to share in their simcha, in their happiness. You bring them a gift. These are all ways of making them happy. You know what is an additional way of making the bride happy, or the groom? Is by telling them how beautiful their choice is. Sir, Chatan, your kala, from a scale of 0 to 10, she's an 11. She's beautiful, even though you have questions about that. You can't figure out how come he married that woman because she's not very attractive in your eyes. So even though she's not attractive in your eyes, and you really are wondering why this was his choice, the mitzvah is still to tell him, your choice is excellent. She's a beautiful woman. As the rabbis tell us, tell him, kala na'a v'hasuda. She's beautiful and graceful, even though it's not true. But wait a minute, isn't that lying? Bet Shammai, by the way, there's another opinion in the Gemara, says, no, you can't add or detract. Just say the way things are. You don't have to point out how ugly she is in your eyes, but don't add or don't exaggerate that she's very, very beautiful and graceful. She's nice. Bet Hillel, which is how we hold, and what we follow in this case, says, no, it is important that you say that she's kalan avach, that she's actually very, very beautiful, even though you don't think so. Why? What's the purpose of this? Number one, it is important, apparently it is a mitzvah, to praise the kala in front of the chatan, in front of the groom. That is part of being mesamech, making him happy. Rabbis tell us this, it's not exactly a lie when something brings shalom, brings peace to the home. Just like a husband is allowed to tell his wife, you're the most beautiful woman in the world. Even though he wants to make her feel good, and he knows it's not exactly 100% accurate, he's allowed to say these things if this is what will make his wife happy. So here too, part of the mitzvah of making the chatan, the groom, happy, is telling him that his wife is a beautiful person. Number two, even though we may not think that she is so beautiful, the chatan apparently does think. And you know what they say in various languages. People have different tastes. When it comes to tastes, everybody has their taste. So it could be that that is his taste. So you're not exactly saying something untrue, because according to the groom, she must be beautiful. That is why he wants to marry her. Number three, the rabbis tell us that in reality, Jewish women are beautiful. There's a certain beauty that they have. However, ha'aniyut mecha'eret otam. Some of them are very poor. And as a result of their poverty, that's why they don't look as nice as they really could. So, what do we see so far from all this? That it is possible that Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, has certain things that we don't like, as every country would have. But all of these things are just on the surface. They're external. They're not as meaningful. And they should not necessarily be pointed out, especially if our goal is to discourage someone. Because what is really important is the essence of the human being. You know how they say in English, beauty is only skin deep, superficial. That's not what you should focus on. You should focus on the mahut, on the essence of the individual. Is this girl that you're dating God-fearing, good-natured, good character? Does she share the same outlook as you do? Is she the cooperative one? These are things that you need to know. This is the essence of the individual. The external things, Shlomo Melech already warned us. Sheker achen vehevel hayofi. Chen, grace is misleading, he says. She could be nice on the outside, attractive, but she could be a witch. Yeah. Vehevel hayofi, and beauty is hevel, is vain, is really worthless. By itself, if you have intelligence, God-fearing, and you have beauty, then you're lucky. But by itself, it's meaningless. So, all of these things apply not only to human beings, but also to countries. And that was their mistake. Their first mistake was that they looked at the superficial things and did not focus on the mahut and the essence of what Israel really is. Such a special place. It's a holy place. If this is the land that Hashem chose to give us, it must be special in some way. So therefore, it could not have been that they were afraid. Why not? Why couldn't they still be afraid? Look at their reactions of someone who just married someone who he thinks is beautiful, but he knows that she or he has flaws. What is the normal reaction of somebody who really cares about someone but knows about their faults? Shlomo Melech says, Al kol peshaim techaseh ahava. If there is real love, love covers up the faults. Whereas there is a saying in various languages, a true friend is a friend that knows you with all your faults and still loves you. He knows your faults. He's familiar, very familiar with your weaknesses, but he still loves you. How do you know he loves you? Because he doesn't talk about the faults. If a person wants to talk about and point out the faults, he doesn't like you. By them choosing to talk about and emphasize the faults, the bad, the negative, that means it's not because they're afraid, it's because they don't like the place. Otherwise, why talk about the bad? If you love someone, or you care about something, then you don't bring out the ugly. You talk about the good. You focus on the more important things. Everything has some weakness or something negative, some things that we may not like. I mean, no one is perfect. But why talk about it repeatedly? And that is the mistake many couples do. They remind each other of all the negative that each other has. Sometimes the wife even reminds the husband, remember what you did to me 30 years ago? What for? It's just bringing back bad memories that hopefully would have been forgotten by now. To bring it back, that means that you don't really care about what's best for the relationship. Someone that cares about the relationship doesn't bring back all the bad. Al kol peshaim techaseh ahava. There's true love, it covers up. Covers up means that you just don't focus on it. So here, they focused on the weaknesses of the land of Israel, even though they were aware of the benefits. So it wasn't because they were afraid they can't do it. That was just an excuse. The biggest question, however, is how could such great people fail? And that is a question that we ask about Korach next week. Korach. How could he go against Moshe? He's from the tribe of Levi. How could he make such a silly mistake, which costed him and his congregants their life? The same thing with the tribes here, with the leaders of the tribes, with the Jewish nation. We're not talking about the Erev Rav, the multitudes, the people that came from the outside and converted, because they came from a different background. They are the ones, therefore, who initiated the golden calf. That's what they were used to, this kind of things. That was their culture. Here we're talking about the Jewish nation. So the question is it's a much bigger question than to just ask this of just any ordinary individual. How could they fail in their mission? Rabbis tell us that the ayn and the heart are shnei sarsurim avera. The two agents of sin, the ones that cause us pretty much all the trouble and get us to commit a transgression, are the eyes and the heart. Which is why in Shema Yisrael we say, Lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei nechem. The Torah warns us, be careful not to go after what your heart desires and what your eyes see. Be careful. These are two agents of sin. They will get you into trouble, depending on what you see and depending on what you desire. How? The eye easily misleads. The heart blinds. Why does the heart blind one? Because the heart are our personal desires. And sometimes when we have personal desires, those desires conflict with the will of Hashem. Hashem says, I want you to do this. But if we have certain desires, certain interests, certain wants, they may conflict with Hashem's desires. So it's our heart that can get us into trouble, that can blind us from what the reality is. And it's the eyes that can easily distract us, mislead us. What happens when the two work together, the eyes and the heart? A Jew who may have been very observant, religious, and in tune with his responsibilities, he can forget his tachlit. He can forget what his purpose of life is all about and focus all his energy, his time, his money on the wrong things. Now, we're not even talking about sin right now. It could be that what he's doing is not sinful, but he may actually forget what his mission in life is all about and may focus on something completely not important. Because in life, there are certain things that are important and certain things that are not important. Certain things that are priorities and certain things that are not priorities. That's the way I think most people see life, or they should. The problem is that some people mix them up. They mix up their priorities. For many people, money becomes a priority. And I sometimes laugh. I hear people talk so much about making more money, investments, and this, and I say to myself, why are you talking about this so much? You're not going to take it with you. Why is this something that occupies your mind the whole day and night? People go crazy when it comes to money. It's interesting. It's a very powerful drive, the drive to make money, to be rich, to be famous. What for? Who needs it? If you can pay your bills and be just fine and comfortable, isn't that enough? As the rabbi said, who's really rich? One who's content with what he has. If you're content, that's more important than anything else. And what do the rabbis tell us about wealth? The more property, the more worries you have. So, are you going to be happy or no? You're going to have more worries. So people are focused a lot on money and all kinds of interests that they have that are totally contradictory to what the purpose of life is. Now, if you tell me the person does not believe that life has a purpose, that life is meaningful, then I guess we can understand that he wants to enjoy himself. Because to him, life has no purpose, no meaning. He's here by accident. He wants to enjoy it and have a good time. That's what people think who have no faith in Hashem, don't believe that life is purposeful, that Hashem created it with a certain idea in mind. Then, of course, they just want to take advantage of whatever they can in this world. Whatever they were taught is important, and a lot of people are taught money and power is what matters. But for a Jew who starts off knowing what the tachlit is, that the tachlit is observance of mitzvot, and that's what Hashem told us. I want you to be my nation. I want you to be a light unto the other nations of the world. I want you to be an example for them to follow. I want you to bring my reign into this world, that everyone should recognize me. And sometimes a Jew fails to do that. He forgets about that. He forgets about his tachlit as a result of him focusing on other things. So what are we going to do? How are we going to remind the Jew of his tachlit? How can we make sure that what happened in the beginning of the Parasha does not repeat itself in the future again? Because remember, if it's discussed in the Parasha, that means there's something for us to learn from. We have to be careful that those mistakes do not repeat themselves. What mistake? The biggest mistake that they made was not focusing on the essence of what the land represents. The land of Israel is not a piece of dirt. It's not just dirt that we're talking about. We're talking about this is the location where the mitzvot will be observed. There are certain mitzvot that are observed outside of Israel too. But that land is the holy land. So entering that land, what is the tachlit of entering that land? Is to observe the mitzvot there. Hashem did not put us in Uganda. Hashem did not put us in somewhere in China. There's a lot of places in the world where Hashem could have put us that is very fertile, good place, spacious place. He chose this small location, relatively small to other countries, because there's something special about that location. But why did he want us to be there for? To observe the mitzvot. Not just to build a house, not just to occupy the land. We did not come into this world just to build a house and to work. The ultimate tachlit, the purpose of life for the Jew, is to observe the mitzvot. And to observe the mitzvot in the land of Israel. To build the Bet HaMikdash, the temple. So this somehow escaped them. The spies came to see the land, and what did they see? That which is external, not important. Yes, of course, it's beautiful that the fruits are big, and that the land is fertile. All of this is good. But what's the ikar, what's the more important thing about the land of Israel? It's a spiritual place. The rabbis tell us that if you learn Torah in Israel, it's the best place to learn. You will see how you are able to absorb that knowledge in a much more powerful way than if you learn Torah outside of Israel. A lot of people have come to the Western Wall. They were never there before. They're not religious. And they began to cry. They don't know why. Something moved them. Something stirred their heart. There's Kedusha in that land. There's holiness in that land. And that holiness can be experienced, depending, of course, on the level, on the spiritual level of the individual. But these are things that cannot be observed. They have to be felt. The problem is a lot of people put more emphasis on the physical, on the external. They see all kinds of things and they begin to complain. There's not enough water, it's too hot, it's too small, there's no room, all kinds of things that people say. This is all external. You know, when people really like each other, I forget the saying, in Arabic there's a saying, in some other languages, they can sleep on the blade of a knife. In other words, there's no room. There's no room. They really like each other. A blade of a knife, in other words, very little space. If people don't like each other, you can give them a 10,000 square foot mansion and they won't be able to get along. Yeah. What's the space have to do with it? As we said before, if people really care, they don't look at the trivialities. They focus on what's really important, what really connects them. So the Torah is going to give us a remedy. So something like that should not repeat itself, that we should not forget about our tachlit. What is that mitzvah? Tzitzit. Tzitzit, the mitzvah tzitzit, fringes that the men wear, is, amongst other reasons, to help the Jew remember his tachlit. What's so special about tzitzit? Well, we can talk a lot about tzitzit. We don't have the time. But as you can see here, this is a talit. Talit is like a big tzitzit that we wear for the prayer during the day. And this large garment has fringes. Now, it has 4 corners. 4-corner garment requires tzitzit. Tzitzit, the numerical value of tzitzit is 600. Add to the 600 the 5 knots that you have here. See? Add to that the 8 strings, and you have 613. The 613 commandments. By wearing the tzitzit, by looking at the tzitzit, uschartem. It's called mitzvot Hashem. You will remember the mitzvot of Hashem. But what else is there here besides the 4 corners, the strings, and the knots? During the time that we had a Bet HaMikdash, in the olden days, we actually had a petil techelet. One of the strings was sky blue, made from a certain fish. There are questions as to the identity of that fish, whether it's a real fish or it's something else. We don't know today what it is, so therefore we don't have that techelet, even though some claim they have the techelet, but it's not so sure. When Mashiach comes, we will have the techelet again. One of those strings is supposed to be made out of that color, blue. What for? What is blue? What's the significance of the blue? So the rabbis tell us the blue that you see on the techelet will remind you of the sky that is blue. And that blue of the sky will remind you of the heavenly throne, of the Kisei HaKavod. Ultimately, that techelet, that blue, will remind you of your obligation in this world as a Jew, to observe the mitzvot. By the way, the numerical value of kanaf, of each corner, with 4 corners, is 150. So you have 4 times 150 is also 600. So you have various ways of remembering the mitzvot, by looking at the tzitzit, by looking at the blue. What is this blue? Does the Kisei HaKavod really have that kind of a color? We don't see the color blue in the Kisei HaKavod. So what does it mean, blue? You know, when we see a color, that particular object does not really have that color. It's just certain colors that are being reflected out of that object, which our eyes are able to see. It's not that that object is made out of that color. There are certain wavelengths, for example, that we can't see at all. But certain sophisticated machines are able to detect certain colorations, for example, in space. the techelet, the blue, is something that is associated with din, with justice. We're told that din is blue, techelet. So therefore, kisei kavod, the throne of Hashem, is associated with that color. Or at least that is the color that is being reflected spiritually. Because the more something is spiritual, you cannot see it either. So what use of it is it to tell us that it's blue? It's to remind us of the association of the ocean, the sky, with the heavenly throne, that they're all blue. Blue representing din, justice. So when we think about din, we think about the kisei kavod, we're reminded about our purpose in life, about our tachlit. If people were more spiritual themselves, if their eyes were pure, they would also see things from a different perspective. They would see life differently. The more physical a person is, he sees things in a different way. So these individuals, had they been more spiritual, obviously they would have focused on more spiritual things. The more physical a person is, the more he's focused on physicality, he will not detect so easily that which is spiritual. Because you cannot see the spiritual, you can only feel it. But how are you going to feel it if the entire focus is on that which is physical? You have great tzaddikim, great sages, who do detect and do feel and do experience the spiritual much more because their eyes are pure. They're able to see all kinds of things that we do not see. In the same way that the tzitzit reminds us of our purpose in life, and that's very important, that is not the only reminder. Hashem wants to remind humanity all the time of His presence. How does He do that? Not everyone wears tzitzit. And even those who wear tzitzit sometimes still forget about their purpose of life. So you think Hashem just gave us tzitzit and that's it? No. Some of the more powerful reminders that Hashem uses is nature. Powerful volcanoes, powerful earthquakes and storms sometimes have that effect to awaken people, to get them to think. As the rabbis tell us on the verse, "Va'elokim asa sheyiru milefanav," God made it so that people should fear Him. What is He talking about? The rabbis tell us, "Ze chalom ra," that's a bad dream. Sometimes a bad dream shakes a person up so much that he wakes up from that and hopefully begins to focus on his life properly. It took a very bad dream to shake him up. Rabbis even tell us that thunder was created to straighten out that which is a little bit crooked in the person's heart. The human heart sometimes is not exactly straight and smooth. I'm not talking about physically now. It's not exactly pure and straight. It sometimes has its own personal interests. It sometimes has all kinds of desires. It's sometimes not in tune with what Hashem wants it to be in tune. So Hashem created, the Gemara says, thunder. That thunder really shakes him up and straightens him up, at least momentarily. He begins to shake. And when people shake, they start thinking a little bit more about the more important things in life. There was a very interesting story that happened not too long ago, where someone was driving and he fell asleep behind the wheel. And he was about to veer off the road. And you know, this happens. People get into terrible accidents as a result of that, falling asleep behind the wheel. And he, Mamash, was about to veer off the road. All of a sudden, a bird crashed into his windshield and he woke him up the last second right before he went off the road. So what do you call that? Miracle, hashgacha, divine providence, wake-up call. He needed a real wake-up call to wake up. But this is a man who's asleep behind his wheel. What about all the people who are asleep while they're alive? They're asleep behind the wheel of life without paying attention to the real things that matter in life. These are the people that forget the purpose of life, what is important and what is not. What happens to people who have no purpose in life, by the way, are not aware of it, if they're ever in a very, very bad situation, they despair. Some of them commit suicide. They see no hope. There's no tachlit. Do you know that some people who are connected in the hospital to a machine, what do you call those machines? Life support, right? You don't want to ever disconnect it if they're already connected. It's not such a simple matter. There was once a son who wanted to do his father a favor. The father was on life support machine and was in pain. He was unconscious already. And son figured, let me get him out of this misery. This is a Jew. He told the doctor, go ahead and disconnect him. The father came in a dream to his son. Why did you disconnect me? Every day that I was on life support machine, suffering in this physical world, was for me an atonement for all my sins. Every day, every moment, even an extra hour, it all counts. They know upstairs how long I'm supposed to be down here. They determine that. Why did you help the angel of death? In other words, why did you make it happen sooner? You only did me a disservice, not a favor. So this young man somehow merited to see his father come to him in a dream to tell him. Not everyone does that. Not everyone has the permission to come and tell in a dream. But we know from this kind of stories that that is what this does. There's a reason for that. There's a tachlit here. There's a purpose for the pain and suffering too. But some people think, no, let me run away from the pain. You can't run away if it's meant to be. People who committed suicide, God forbid, they don't know what's awaiting them upstairs. It's a terrible punishment for someone who threw away the gift of life. Life is a gift. Why did you throw it away? Because you didn't know any better. Obviously, these people don't know that life has a purpose. Life is meaningful. So such individuals, if they are in trouble, they lose hope. They don't know what to do. A Jew is supposed to know what his tachlit is. What is the ultimate goal? What is your purpose in life? What are you here for? You have a mission to accomplish. It may be that you will accomplish your mission in 45 years, maybe in 75 years, whatever. But focus on that. Focus on doing what you need to do, and what we all have in common as far as our common mission is to do the mitzvot. So a Jew needs to constantly remember, I'm here primarily for that purpose, to do the will of Hashem. If you recall, I may have told you the story with Baba Sali. In his later years, he had a baby. In his later years. I think it was from his last wife. This is at least what I was told. And on the day of the circumcision, everyone is happy. Brit Milah, on the 8th day. As soon as they finished the Brit Milah, the baby died. All that happiness vanished. Everybody was crying. You can imagine the mood in the house. The Gabbai, the helper, the rabbi's helper, went over to him. He noticed that he was smiling. He said, Rabbi, why are you smiling? Everybody's sad. Look what happened. He says, everybody doesn't know. This baby was a tzaddik in a previous lifetime. He was really a righteous man. He didn't really have to come back in a reincarnation. The only reason he came is because he never had a Brit Milah in the previous lifetime. Somehow he was never circumcised. It could be he was very ill. Who knows? And they couldn't circumcise him, or who knows? Or he grew up in some place where he didn't know. Either way, that's all he needed for his tikkun. As soon as he got that, he left. There was no reason for him to stay. I shouldn't be happy that I merited to have such a soul in a child, the soul of a pure, righteous tzaddik. But he knew. Most of us don't know these things. But the more we focus on the tachlit, by learning, of course, Torah, the more we realize what is really important and what's not. And this helps in giving us the strength that we need to be able to deal with challenging times, difficult times that everyone goes through in life. As a result of the fact that the Jewish people have gone through many, many troubles in life, many persecutions, look at the Nevi'im, look at the prophets. We have many prophets, many prophecies about Mashiach. Why did they write all this for us? They wrote it not for their generation, who passed away right away, for generations to come, 2,500 years later. They wrote these prophecies for many generations to come. Pay attention to the prophecies whenever you're going through trouble, whenever you think that the exile will never finish. It will finish. We reassure you, Mashiach will come. You will see the third temple rebuild. You will see the ingathering of the diaspora. You will see the dead rise one day, very soon. You will see the galut finishing. The exile will be gone completely. Reassuring words. Otherwise, why document those prophecies? What are they for? To remind us that there is a script here. There's a purpose. There's a design. Life is not just, it's not just existence. We exist. No, it's purposeful. Just like to finish with an incredible story that proves the point of how Hashem will awaken the Jews right before Mashiach comes. Here we're talking about people who are asleep, people that are being awakened in all kinds of ways. There are many, many Jews today that don't even know what it means to be Jewish, or don't even know that they are Jewish. So Hashem has his ways of awakening people. But the following story is an incredible story that happened right after World War II. For those of you who may have read a little bit about the war, a lot of Jewish kids were given by the parents to a neighbor, a non-Jewish neighbor. Please watch over him. Hopefully when we come back from the camps, pick him up. Most of these parents never came back. These kids were eventually given over to monasteries, Catholic monasteries, where they would be trained in Catholicism, where they would be taught about Catholicism, and eventually this is the type of life that they would lead. No one thought that parents would come back. So this place took care of them. At least there they were safe from the Nazis. There was a great rabbi, the Ponevezh Rav, the rabbi of the city of Ponevezh, who later built a beautiful yeshiva in Israel, today one of the biggest yeshivot in the world, the yeshiva of Ponevezh. Great rabbi. And he took it upon himself right after the war to search for these kids, these orphans, and try to introduce them back into Judaism, take them with him to Israel, and set them up. And he went to the priest, the main priest who's in charge of one monastery, where he found out that there were a lot of Jewish kids. And he tells the priest, that the Nazis killed a lot of Jews, and I'm here to collect the few that remained. Please hand me over the Jewish children that you have, because I know that you have some Jewish children, for sure. So he says, Rabbi, I can't tell you who's Jewish. I don't know if there are any Jewish kids here. What are you going to tell me, that I should give you the ones that are circumcised? There are a lot of Catholics who are circumcised too. What are you going to do? You're going to search the names and you're going to tell me Weinstein is Jewish? That could be a German name too. What are you going to look at? And by the way, many of these kids you can't even ask because they don't remember. Some of them came when they were 2-3 years old. What do they remember? It's been 6 years. You think I'm going to give you days and days to investigate? And you have all the time in the world so that you can take some kids out of here? No, Rabbi, I don't agree to do that. So the rabbi turns to him and says, I don't need days. I don't need hours. Give me 5 minutes to be with the kids. And I'll be able to pick out the Jewish kids. 5 minutes, Rabbi, that's it. Yeah, 5 minutes. He went to the dining room where they were all seated, and he looked at them, and they all looked Catholic. And he cried out, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And as soon as he said those words, that hear, O Israel, that God is one, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of kids ran to him. Tate, mame in Yiddish, father and mother, please come and take us. When the rabbis saw that, he began to cry. And they say the priest also began to cry. And he went over to the rabbi, "Rabbi, you won. But can you tell me, how did you do it?" He says, "Yes, you were right all along. I did not know. And there was no way for me to know who was Jewish here. So many years went by, they were youngsters. What do they remember? I therefore had to think of something that perhaps their mother would say to them. What does every Jewish mother share? What does every Jewish mother do with her child before she puts him to sleep? She says the Shema with him as she's kissing the mezuzah on the doors of the home. She takes him and says the Shema with him. I therefore decided to recall those few words that perhaps those children do remember, because they remember their mother. But how am I going to remind them of their mother? Through those pesukim, through that verse in the Torah. And you see, I succeeded. That is the key, really the key before Mashiach comes, for Jews to try to remember where they come from. Because the moment they will realize where they come from, they will also know where they're headed. Amen.